Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wayne Kimmel, the host of the Investing in Sports show that we're going to be doing today, which is being brought to you by Summit Trail Advisors and 76 Capital. And I'm really excited to have two co-hosts today, Peter Lee, who is the founding partner of Summit Trail Advisors, and one of the other partners at Summit Trail Advisors, John Williams. So before we get started, I'm going to kick it over to Peter and John, and they will talk about what Summit Trail Advisors is all about, how we got this all together, and why we're so excited to present Investing in Sports, our first edition, which today will be focused on the esports industry. So Peter, take it away.
Thanks, Wayne. Thank you. Appreciate everyone joining us today. For those of you that aren't part of the Summit Trail family, I thought we could just give a brief background on Summit Trail and the firm, and then get into the conversation. And we are definitely in learning mode today here at Summit Trail in this emerging industry. So excited to learn from all the wonderful panelists that Wayne and the team have helped us assemble. So briefly on Summit Trail, we are next week ready to celebrate our 5th anniversary next Friday. And 5 years ago, we set out to build what we envisioned as being a national networked family office. And in doing so, we wanted to partner with families that had somewhat outgrown the traditional wealth management industry, but weren't quite at the point of wanting to build their own single family office. And we envisioned building this networked family office throughout the country. And today we now sit at Summit Trail. Our family includes 56 employees across 6 cities. We advise upon about $7 billion in assets for a select group of families throughout the country. And our client ecosystem really is comprised of 3 main types of clients. One being first-generation entrepreneurs and business owners. The second primary bucket of clients are professional investors, so folks that have founded venture capital firms, private equity firms, private real estate firms. And then the third bucket are a group of professional athletes and some entertainers. So really across all 3 of those buckets, Wayne, we've seen quite a bit of inbound interest on this topic of esports. And a lot of our clients have considered purchasing and investing in professional sports franchises and traditional sports. And I think now we're starting to open that opportunity set to include esports. And I really wanted to learn more about, how the world works and, how to potentially invest in the space as well. So I think the genesis of this whole panel, I called John and we were kind of chatting about the industry, and I was trying to myself just learn more about it. And one thing I did not know is that where John is coming to us live from today, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, is actually at the epicenter of the esports world, which is something I did not realize until reaching out to John. So we kind of were chatting about the topic, and then he came up with the idea, why don't we loop in our buddy Wayne and leverage his expertise and his network, and kind of pull together an opportunity for all of us and our community of clients and friends to learn more about the topic. So why don't I throw it over to John, coming live from Harrisburg, and he can kind of provide a little more background on how this came together, and then we'll have to get into the discussion.
Well, before we throw it over to John, I have one question for you, Peter. And first of all, I wanted to see how you're doing, make sure you've been healthy and staying safe. I mean, the last time we were together was in Chicago, where you're based, right? And during the NBA All-Star game, it was freezing cold out, and I didn't. And now here we are in the middle of this pandemic. I hope that everyone's doing well on your end.
Yeah, thanks. No, thanks. It's funny to think about, that was only 4 or 5 months ago, and we actually partnered with one of our good friends in the entrepreneurial community in Chicago over at Cameo, and Summit Trail and Cameo hosted a party together, and we had probably 300 people packed in Cameo's office, having drinks and food, and for today it's like, oh my gosh, that feels like an illegal encounter there. So crazy how much the world has changed, but I think some of what we're going through, and I'm sure we'll talk about this today, through the COVID pandemic and how business has changed and how the sports world has changed. I mean, I think that makes today's topic even more timely and relevant, right, in terms of how the world of sports is continuing to evolve throughout COVID. And but thanks for asking, Wayne. And we're doing well in Chicago, enjoying some good weather finally, so no complaints.
That's great. That's great. Well, John, really excited to have you and Peter as partners in doing this event, and maybe share a little bit about your background and what you're doing at Summit Trail, and how this all came together.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. This is obviously a very exciting time here for us. We came to Summit Trail Advisors in August of last year, and we got to have the opportunity, really, my partner Kevin and I, to take a lot of questions from financial news reporters on what the opportunity was, what we were doing with Summit Trail, and obviously with the legacy offices for Summit Trail being in major metropolitan areas, New York City, Boston, Chicago, San Fran, Seattle. I got a question that I always would get, and that is, why Harrisburg? And that was an interesting thing that I got to talk about, and it's obviously we're proud of it due to the fact we have a lot of great entrepreneurs and business owners that we get to serve here in the Mid-Atlantic region. But one thing I am remiss to say now, and after that, Wayne, you and I got together pre-COVID, we had lunch and we kind of talked about our businesses and what you do and what we do at Summit Trail. And you obviously worked with, Peter and team in Chicago in the past. And I was just remiss now in those interviews. I didn't get to say, well, clearly, Harrisburg is the epicenter of esports. So that's another reason why we have an office here, right? So, no, it's just, we're kind of joking there, but we kind of aren't, as well as we're sitting, as we said earlier, just about 3 Harrisburg blocks away from Harrisburg University. And so really, as Peter was talking about, and you look at the demographic of our clients, always looking at, of course, very interesting opportunities outside of just the public markets. And of course, we want to learn more about it ourselves as advisors, and as well as partnering with you at 76 Capital to see what is the opportunity set in such an expansive emerging industries such as esports. And so this is how it all came together, and we're excited to partner with you guys and learn more from the real experts, from Coach Joe and Eric Darr and John Fazio. So thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And I got to thank you for making sure I don't get lost on the mean streets of Harrisburg. At least you walked me right to my next meeting, I mean, it's really amazing what a small and warm and tight knit community the whole Harrisburg area is, and where your office is, and right next to Harrisburg University, and all the other things that are going on there. So great to do this. Really excited, and I guess let's kick this off and get it started. So I'd like to first bring on some of our guests. We have 3 great guests for our esports panel around investing in sports. And first is John Fazio, the CEO of Nerd Street Gamers. And John, welcome to our show today.
Thanks for having me, Wayne.
Yeah, well, we're really excited to have you, and love to. We'll also bring on one of the things that I should just mention is that, first of all, full disclosure, I guess on a financial show, Peter and John, you do this, right? We're investors in Nerd Street Gamers, and have been involved and sit on the board of John's company. As you can see, you can follow John at JFoz on Twitter, and he's a great follow. And I think that John has built an incredible business where Nerd Street Gamers is an esports company that's looking to bring esports to everyone. And John will share what he means by that with his mission as we continue on the show. And now I'd like to bring on Eric Darr. Eric is the president of Harrisburg University, where Harrisburg University has 3 esports teams, correct?
Yes.
Hearthstone,
Overwatch, League of Legends, and Hearthstone are the 3 games we compete in.
And I can't wait to have Eric share with everybody how, as president of the university, and how and why he decided to make esports the first varsity sport at Harrisburg University. It's a fascinating story. Our third guest today is Joe Germano, and Joe goes by, many of you may know him as Joe Meister. You see it there. That's his handle as well on Twitter. Joe is the Overwatch head coach at Harrisburg University and a former professional esports player. So, Joe has the perspective of not only being a professional esports player and what does that really mean, in the world, and also now as a coach. And you'll hear how well his team is doing this year, and they're in the finals that we'll talk about as well. So let's get started here. I mean, John, maybe to kind of kick things off, it'd be great to have everyone share with everybody what Nerd Street Gamers is all about and how you got into the esports industry.
Sure, appreciate it, Wayne. As you mentioned, we're trying to bring esports to everyone, and what that means is that right now there's a really big gap in what we perceive as the excitement of esports and how many people it actually reaches. And so, the industry of esports is currently a privileged industry inherently, and what that means is that to participate, you're affording expensive computers and games and internet connections and things that a lot of people in our country and the world don't have. And to fix that, we need to build, economic models that can serve those communities without necessarily relying on different monetization options that go away in recessionary environments. And so what Nerd Street really focused on was building physical infrastructure, which means facilities, but also pop-up facilities and production capabilities, and unifying that on a digital network that gives people access to the equipment they need to play. What that allows us to do is go to high schools and colleges that would love to participate in esports but might lack an arena for teams to compete within, or might lack just the computers for their own students to train on. And we build the facilities as public businesses that we have various monetization routes at the core of which is a subscription model that allows us to offer subsidized, affordable costs to these student athletes and recreational athletes that would like to compete in esports but otherwise couldn't without the equipment. For me, I got my start here. I was raised as a privileged individual, and my parents found out that I was really adept at computers at a young age and pushed me into building my own computers and eventually starting a software company by the time I was 13. And so I had this kind of bifurcation in my life because I was also a really good athlete and being pushed into these kind of elite training facilities and sent around the world to play soccer. And I had two groups of friends, and my computer nerd friends and my athletes who just did not talk to each other and did not communicate until they played a video game together called Unreal Tournament. And it was like probably 9th or 10th grade. And for the first time, I had my friends playing with me, both groups of friends. And so it was a really profound lesson in how video games can bring people together. But what immediately became obvious was like, me and my soccer friends are traveling the world and going to tour colleges and getting our college paid for and have, career opportunities being built from this, while my competitive gamer friends, that were playing PC games just as hardcore as we were practicing soccer, putting in just as much effort with just as high skill barriers, had no upside. And so this was back in 2002, 2003 through 2004. I kind of set out with the idea of, can we build, the infrastructure that would allow for competitive frameworks for esports. Back then was called competitive gaming because the word esports didn't exist, that would rival traditional sports and allow gamers to have opportunities to go to college and play esports or get sent around the world and recruited and build career opportunities from. Failed to raise the capital back then as a naive 19-year-old, set off to start my own business, and 10 years later came back to fund and invest in Nerd Street, which is now a leader in the amateur and infrastructure space in the category.
It's a great story, John. Love it, and it's great to be an investor in your company and have other investors like Comcast and Five Below that are also investors with us in your company. Moving over to Eric, and Eric is as president of Harrisburg University. I'd love to hear how you decided that you wanted to make the first varsity sport at Harrisburg University be esports, and why.
Well, thanks, Wayne. So Harrisburg University will educate about 10,000 students this academic year, focused on science and technology and math. A very career-focused institution, and those students that are interested in those topics and career paths aren't your best football players or baseball players or basketball players, and that's not their interest. And as John said, kind of separate paths. And so what our students were interested in was video games, and the esports club is the biggest club on campus, and to this day remains the biggest club. But athletics add a lot to a university, right? They allow community building inside the university. They allow the university to connect to the community it sits in, and it allows an institution to build brand and awareness in a way that it otherwise couldn't. And so, we had explored a variety of athletics options through the years, but esports fit with our students and presented to us in, say, circa 2017, an opportunity to make a national name for ourselves. And so, we were not going to be on the national stage by starting a Division III baseball team, but starting an Overwatch team and competing for a national championship and winning a national championship like we did last year, put us on ESPN for an hour in prime time where they mentioned Harrisburg University 84 times in an hour. Not that I counted or anything, but and so we also have thought about esports as a spectator sport from the very beginning. So not just the way a lot of universities think about competitive video gaming is, a group of players with some cute computers in a classroom playing, some other students halfway around the country in a classroom with a computer. We were fortunate enough to think about esports as a spectator sport and put together the largest collegiate invitational that the nation has ever seen. And we did that with John's help and Nerd Street's help, and 150 computers sitting in one of our academic buildings later. We had 48 universities and 64 teams competing over 4 days in Overwatch and League of Legends. This year it'll be an online tournament, but every bit as big. And so again, that's a way for Harrisburg University to build a brand and build an awareness and generate sponsorships and recruit students in a way that we never could before. So that's the principal reasons for esports and some of the benefits we've seen to date.
Well, super exciting and amazing work that you've done so far. And, you have a pretty great coach in Joe Germano. And Joe, I'd love for you to share, a little bit of your path, how you got into the world of esports, becoming a professional player and now coach.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Wayne. So my journey started, I guess, maybe a little unusually, but I was in the last semester of my undergrad at York University in Toronto, Canada, and I was approached by some of my closest friends who I had met online, actually just gaming over the years, and they approached me, with this idea to try and build a team for a new game that was coming out that everyone believed was going to be the next, big esports title. And I didn't know what to think at the time, but there was one thing that I did know, and that was that, I was passionate about competing and wanting to improve, especially, in gaming. And that's what I had always done as a kid. That's, one of the hobbies that I was most familiar with. And so that's really how it all started. It was really just a hobby. And, we ended up building something so special from nothing. And shortly after, we built this team, we found ourselves sitting in, calls with some of the most prominent endemic esports organizations who were looking to actually, sign players to contracts, and everything just kind of took off from there. And I remember the first signing we had, all of us as pro players, was with Complexity Gaming, and that was in Overwatch. And that to me was, a very big deal for me. I'd never even imagined making my way into esports just like that. But this was something that I just, went with. I really believed in it. I was passionate about it. And I saw a future in it ultimately. And I've stuck with it since then. I've gone from, one team to a couple others over my time as a professional player. And most recently, and this is what I'm currently doing now, I've, made the transition from playing into coaching, and I'm now the head coach at Harrisburg University for their Overwatch team. But yeah, that's how the journey all started. It was really just out of passion and hobby, and it ended up being something, a lot more serious, in large part because of the growth the industry has seen over the last couple of years in particular, and how much it's just taken off and, been able to give those kinds of opportunities to people like me.
Joe, that's great. And again, just want to, a number of viewers have come on. I want to sort of reset. You're all watching Investing in Sports with Peter Lee and John Williams from Summit Trail Advisors. I'm Wayne Kimmel from 76 Capital, and where our focus today is all on esports. And we have three great guests, and John Fazio, Eric Darr, and Joe Germano. And I'd love to sort of, talk about, what really is esports, right? We talk about there's video games, there's esports. There are, we've heard now that there are universities that have teams. There are universities, there's over 200 universities today that offer scholarships for people that are players that are good enough to play at the collegiate level. And Eric, I'd love, to hear from you, just to sort of talk about the overall world. What is, what's sort of the difference between just playing a video game and in an esports and this competitive video game world that we're in today?
Well, that's a great place to start, Wayne. And Joe had mentioned John had mentioned this, I think in his intro, that there's playing video games and just enjoying a video game, on your couch in your basement, and lots of us do that. I've spent thousands of hours of my life playing video games. It's my choice instead of going to the movies or reading a book is to play video games, right? So that's one thing. Esports is competitive video gaming. And there are, just like in any competitive sports, there are multiple levels to it, meaning you can enjoy competitive gaming with your friends, supported by a number of platforms today, or you can compete at very high levels in the college ranks. And most of our players, many of our players, could turn pro if they wanted to. Joe was a pro. Our League of Legends coach was a pro. The director of esports at Harrisburg was a pro. And then there are professional leagues that are out there for competitive games. And players make hundreds of thousands. Some of the best in the world that are icons, they make millions, just like any other professional athletes. But make no mistake, there's a huge difference between playing a video game on your couch kind of casually and playing for a team like the Harrisburg Storm at the top of the collegiate level, or for the Philadelphia Fusion like Joe did. That takes thousands and thousands of hours of practice, commitment, a structured life like any professional athlete. And so, when people talk about, oh, I play video games, that's all well and fine, and that's great. That's what I do. But I'm very far from a high level esports player. And I think one of the interesting opportunities in the industry is, like other sports, how do players develop, and how do they move from a casual gamer to somebody that perhaps has talent and has a commitment, and like Joe is a very competitive person, and turns that loose on a passion like Overwatch or some other video game, and turns themselves into a top world ranked player. So what does that development path look like, right? That's an interesting question for the industry, and I think, per the topic of the show, presents some interesting opportunities for investment, some new businesses, and in many ways, I think that's what Harrisburg University is about. Certainly, educating people, and what Joe does as our coach. But I also think that's what John does at Nerd Street is, as he said, democratize, if you will, the opportunity for anybody who really has a passion for video games to not just play games, but to perhaps get into esports in a way they never could before.
Well, I think my co-hosts here, Peter and John's ears perked up when they heard that video esports players make millions of dollars. So they want to find those clients for the future. As Peter mentioned earlier, maybe it's because they work with a lot of professional athletes. Gamers are next. I think So when you think about how do you get there? And I think that's one of the things I want to ask John Fazio. What you do at Nerd Street Gamers, even this summer I think this was Nerd Street Gamers' third summer of having a summer camp. How do you actually go from being just a kid who likes playing video games to actually being someone like Joe, who was a professional.
Yeah, this summer's summer camps look very different than the last 2 years. They're all remote online camps, which, the upside is we get to do a lot more and we get to reach a lot more people. The downside is that we don't get that, in-person social connection that we all love. But, it's still a very good experience and you get to take advantage of it. But unfortunately, if you don't have a computer at home, you're not going to be able to, do that. And so that's, again, why we're so eager to get back to, offering this infrastructure to people. I think when you think about the path to professional, there are a lot of comparisons that you can make, and like Eric said, there's all sorts of gamers and there's all sorts of competitive gamers too. I'm a competitive gamer, but I have no intention of being pro. I'm like the guy who joins the club basketball and just wants to play because it's fun, and I'm pretty good but not nearly as good enough to play in a varsity team. And so there's all of these different layers there, but how you get into that is very difficult right now. So first off, like I said, you have to have the equipment, you have to have if you want to be a top tier competitor, a very expensive computer or, a good console with a good controller and a good internet connection. But then there's this very difficult kind of grind, as we call it, the ladder grind, where you're playing against a global leaderboard. Some people on there are cheating. Some people on there are on better internet and worse internet. It's a mess. And Joe Meister can tell you all about the ladder grind and how, messy it is. And frankly, where a lot of the toxicity that we've heard about in gaming comes from, because there's a bunch of people that are completely anonymized and forced into this really harsh competitive environment. And so if you're a kid or somebody that's used to the idea of like, I went to my rec center, I joined a soccer team, I had a coach teach me how to play and get used to it, and then maybe saw a league if I had talent, or went to a couple different opportunities of competitive skill, that doesn't really exist in the industry right now without companies like Nerd Street and what we do. And so that's really the focus we provide, is if you're coming to us, like you mentioned, the camps, that's a very good start for a lot of the kids that join our camps, where they have this really big passion for video games. They sit at home and they play Fortnite every day, and now their parents are hearing that Ninja's winning millions of dollars and is on CNBC, and they're really excited and saying, I want my kid to do that. And so the camp is a really good opportunity to say, here's your entry point. We're going to put you with professional coaches just like Joe Meister, who are going to teach you and train you and explain to you how the ecosystem works. And there's hundreds of online communities that you have to navigate and join, and Nerd Street unifies and brings those together and gives you all of them within reach, especially when you're in one of these camps. The camps especially are important because we get a chance, especially with these young kids, to go outside of just the competition. And so it's not just about, I'm here to be a professional gamer. It's, I'm going to learn how this industry works. I'm going to learn how various verticals like production and event management and content generation work, and then I can come out of this just like with sports. 99% of the kids I played soccer with growing up don't play soccer now professionally. They got careers, but I'm sure that soccer career amplified them getting there. And so we have that, kind of same opportunity here for the esports world. Then, what we've done with our facilities and our online tournaments is, if you come to the Nerd Street platform, we're going to immediately put you into what's called a Discord, which is an online chat platform that pulls communities together and allows them to, chat. We use that to organize our tournaments, to organize our weekly events, where you might have a few hundred people sitting in our Discord, and we're organizing you into groups of competition and play. If you're, a newbie, we might kind of send you to one group and say, here's where you're going to go, kind of meet other people who are at your skill level, and somebody will stop in to teach you about what your options are for growing. If you're really good, we might let you go off and compete, or here's a tournament for you to join. And so, I think that it's evolving rapidly is the answer. I think that for most people, it's a scary, anonymized, digital only experience of trying to just progress high enough that a school or a team sees me. But companies like us and other companies that exist in this space are helping build the infrastructure that makes it much more akin to traditional sports and not so scary. And that eventually any city in the country, you'll be able to go to a Nerd Street facility just like you go to your local rec center to find out where I'm supposed to take my first step in esports.
Wow. We're really excited to have, such great guests on our Investing in Sports Esports Edition show with Summit Trail Advisors, along with their partner and founding partner, Peter Lee, and partner John Williams. It's great to have this amazing panel. And, in the past, some of the shows that we've done at 76 Capital, we talked to collegiate basketball coaches or other types of coaches, and we've never had an esports coach on before. And now we have, we have Joe Gramano on, and we talk, a number of these coaches about recruiting and working with their players and what that's like in a traditional sport. I'd love to hear from your perspective, John and Joe, what it really means to work with be a coach in the world of esports.
Yeah, so I mean, to touch on, I guess, some of the things you just mentioned in particular. So something like recruitment, for example, it definitely is, a different kind of challenge when you compare it to traditional athletics. I mean, esports really is a global sport, I would say, in the sense that, there's talent all over the world. And so when I do my recruitment for our program, I mean, I'm looking at, everywhere I possibly can for talent. We can look at places like Finland, Australia, South Korea, right here at home in North America. I mean, there are no boundaries or barriers in that sense, and it's a hard search for the right kind of talent. There's a lot of student athletes out there who want to make it, and who have a lot of talent and who have the drive and are passionate about it. But it does become challenging when you do have to pick a small number to compete for your school when you're looking to be the top collegiate esports program. And to give you a better idea, I mean, by nature, esports can operate digitally and almost entirely. And so most of my recruitment actually starts out online. We have various phases that we go through, just like any other athletic program. So we'll start with like some kind of application phase. That'll move on to like an actual playtime phase, and then we can move on to like interviews or whatever else comes next, where we sit down, evaluate the student, evaluate their academics, evaluate how far they've made it in their education, and ultimately to be able to make the right decision. And I mean, yeah, I mean, in that sense, recruitment is no different than any other athletic program. But it's certainly different, like I said, in the sense that you're looking, globally, not just locally or within your particular region.
So, Joe, I mean, you talk about looking in from a recruiting perspective, and maybe you or Eric could jump in here and talk about this. I mean, like you're not going to, like, if it was basketball, they have the tournaments in different physical places. A lot of what you're doing also is online, and so what are some of those places, and what are some of the platforms that people play on? Maybe sort of share that background, because I think a number of the viewers are aware of the world of esports, but where do you actually go find these games to watch, and where do you find the players? Like, where does that all happen?
Yep. Yeah, so that's a great question.
So Joe, just let me, why don't you, tell people. So Joe's newest player is coming from Brazil, right? So just to give you a sense of the breadth of this recruiting. So how did you find him and where, and how does that happen? How does a school in Pennsylvania connect to a world-class player in Brazil?
The Brazilian player is actually on the League of Legends team. So Alex,
that's right.
League of Legends head coach, would have a much better idea of how that all came about. But I mean, I've had similar experiences, where we have recruited international players, and I mean, like I said, all of that starts online, and to your question, Wayne, there's very unique platforms that are, I guess, widely used in esports, and that we use, for ourselves to scout talent, to recruit talent, whatever it looks like. And some of those platforms are things like Twitch.tv, which is a live streaming platform for not just esports but gaming in general. And so we use that as a very big resource for scouting talent. We use, like John Fazio said, something like a global leaderboard as a start, to see what kind of talent is out there, what top players can we even start looking into. And then we use things like Discord, which is, I guess, the Slack for esports. It's essentially just a communication tool where gamers and competitors and young athletes are looking to join communities, build communities, and can use that as a way to, come across certain opportunities. So, I mean, those are some of the biggest ones that we use as part of the whole scouting and recruiting process. But yeah, I mean, like you said, those are tools that are very unique to esports in that sense. You wouldn't really find much of that being used for anything as far as traditional athletics is concerned.
John, on that point, I mean, John, you not only are you someone who's well versed in the world of esports, but you're also someone who probably can speak the financial world. I wouldn't say as well as Peter and John, but you're pretty good when it comes to this. And so I'd love to, maybe break it down a little bit, like, who owns Twitch, who owns YouTube, which is another platform, and talk about some of the really big players. This is what's happening in this world, and just how big this overall esports industry is.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple layers here. There's the publisher layer, which you got to start with, and that's the foundation. And I'm sure at this point, if you've looked into investing in esports, you've heard the Spalding analogy that, unlike Spalding, the game publishers who make the ball can actually tell you where and when you can play the game. And so that, control over the intellectual property and the monetization of it, allows the publishers to really dictate what the different verticals look like. And so us as an infrastructure provider, providing for the amateur scene, we're there really to implement their vision, because if we were to go out and build a vision of our own and they didn't like it, they could pull it back. And so that control is at the center of this entire, industry. And we all really play more or less in their gardens. And so for, me as an investor looking at a developing industry, it's the companies that can provide industry that those publishers will rely on. It's the companies that can create ecosystems off of the publishers that will generate the publishers' revenue and get a cut along the way. Yep.
Real quick, jumping in here. So who are some of the publishers? Who are some of the names that maybe some of the people, if you're in a public, investing in public equities, you'll know some of those names?
Yeah, ATVI, Activision, EA, Electronic Arts, TTWO, Take-Two, Interactive, Tencent, who owns a piece of all of them at this point. So these different game publishers are, historically were the companies you went to get your games sent out to all the different stores and the retails you needed. And then they built their own digital e-com platforms where you purchase the games. There's various, walled gardens that exist within these publisher verticals, and that's where they take and sell their games to us.
So then, and then those games, where do you view those games? We were talking about Twitch.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, to sort of finish the kind of the layers you have there, the first layer being the publishers, the second layer being the infrastructure, and the third layer being really the teams and the talent is how I see it. And so on the infrastructure side, there's two core components to esports: the competition itself and then the broadcast of the competition. And just like traditional sports, if you were somebody who was trying to be a D1 athlete in any sport, you had your mom or your dad out there videotaping you, trying to create content that you could send around to the colleges and get recruited. That was the primary, and still is. Now there's great software out there that does it, but the primary method of getting recruited, if you weren't a star or you weren't at the top of the leaderboard for everybody else, was to be very aggressive and taking content and sending it out to the schools. And so in esports, very similarly, the competitions and the content are what's really exciting to the players. But the difference is, because the content is so implicit in generating a video game, meaning that not only are we able to watch the game from an observer point of view like you would from a camera, but every one of the players themselves could broadcast their own perspective, the equivalent of me sitting there and watching every single player on the football field and being able to flip between their channels and helmets. That's what exists in esports. So there's just so much more kind of, content being generated. Twitch, as Joe mentioned, was, really the first to get out and do this at scale, and Twitch is owned by Amazon. Behind that is YouTube Gaming, Facebook Live, has their own platform. Mixer, who was a Microsoft product, just got shelved and shut down and sent its community over to the Facebook Live gaming community. And so now we're seeing this kind of, the big boys are entering the space with Google and Amazon and Facebook lining up to control the content side. And so for me, again, from an investing perspective, it's the companies that can take advantage of those different kind of content publishers and either make them money, create ecosystems on top of them or put them in a position to be relied on. And then I think there's this whole green space when it comes to the competition. Right now there's hundreds of digital platforms that you could go to compete on in esports. There's a few facilities, there's not that many yet. And so the infrastructure problem is huge. Right now you have a company like Play Versus, who is the high school and college esports platform that's raised $100 million and is growing rapidly. They've got kids signing up for the platform in hordes at high schools without labs or computers for the kids to play on. And so right now the demand for this industry is so far beyond the actual infrastructure to put the supply where it needs to be, that the companies that can fix that piece and connect publisher and supply and demand together here and be a market maker, those are the ones that I think are most interesting. And you'll find most of that in the competitive operations space, where the publisher space, the broadcast space, they're very crowded. There's big players in there, and then if you're in the team space, it's a very high valuation, high ego, high kind of excitement, investment driven world where you're making 20-year bets to hold something that you just want to have in your portfolio, not looking for IRR on a 10-year basis. And so if you are an investor looking at this, these teams can be kind of unattractive at high valuations unless you have that vision and commitment to really sink your teeth in. And so what I think will happen over the next few years is these infrastructure companies are going to start to really make themselves known. Companies like us and companies that exist out there are going to start to really develop, because the market's developed, and now we're able to really solidify ourselves as players here. And as we bring more benefit to publishers and broadcast companies and teams, we solidify ourselves as increasingly safe bet investments.
I would say, Wayne, just a slightly different take on what John just said. From a talent and organization perspective and putting together teams, the industry is just so young and so chaotic, as John rightfully points out. But it does allow for investors who have the resources and have the passion and maybe have a vision for creating an esports org that's different to get into it. Right. So in other sports, trying to get into a franchise or buy into a team, is a near $1 billion proposition. In this world, for a few $1 million, one can start a team, depending upon the game and depending upon the location and depending upon the vision, the price tag goes up. And for the orgs that have been around, they, John said, is right, high valuations without a lot of revenue. We've seen this in other industries, seen that movie many times. But it does that, the fact that that's the case creates opportunity and creates possibilities. So, that's another, the other side of the coin is that these opportunities to create orgs that can very quickly grow in valuation does still exist.
Well, I completely agree. And Eric, I'd love to follow up on one of the things also, about just the overall growth of esports, but from an educational perspective and from a university perspective. And it's more than just the team at Harrisburg University. You've built a curriculum around this. I'd love to hear what you're doing and how you're thinking about it, even this whole industry holistically.
Right. So again, John mentioned some of the career possibilities, content creation, being a broadcaster, being, working on the production side of it, pre and post, being an analyst for the games. There are just untold number of career opportunities if you're not in the top 1% of 1% to become a professional player. And so we created a bachelor's program in esports management. Has some pieces from a traditional sports management curriculum, but it also has some really stark differences. One of them is around analytics, and because analytics is so central to competitive positioning and the creation of a winning organization or a winning team, even the execution on an infrastructure side, analytics is just so important. And these games create so much data. How to put that together in meaningful ways is critically important in this industry. And so, our esports bachelor's degree program has a track in analytics, if that's of interest for you. Another is marketing. How do you monetize and how do you take advantage of the millions of eyes that are on twitch.tv, right? That's a very different proposition than in traditional sports. And so it takes a different perspective on marketing. How do you build player brand? How do you kind of coach players to be their own brand? That's a piece of the program. And then the third aspect for us is around mentoring and coaching. That's another big hole in this industry, is that great coaches like Joe don't exist. There's no training program. There's no way that, just like we talked about, no real clear path for players to advance through the industry. There's even less of a path for coaches. And so, we'd like to create, a bachelor's program that, for those that might have an interest in becoming coaches at the high school level, college level, professional level, can work in that way. And these are for, students that have a passion about esports, video gaming, but recognize that, they're never going to be the top 1%. And so we're one of the first universities in the US to do it. There are a growing number that offer bachelor's degrees. We're kind of specialized in the way we do things. But when your parents say, stop playing video games, there's no future in it, wrong, right? There's full ride scholarships to top universities. There's, 6-figure entry career paths, and there's highly technical career options that, regardless of what the game is, and the games will come and go, but the production skills and the technical skills required to bring the industry together will still be there. So keep playing, Overwatch, keep playing League of Legends. Those are the games that'll get you the scholarships more than any other games. Maybe Rocket League, coming up, will earn you some scholarship, and then think about career options. There are lots of different career options.
Well, those are some big headlines right there, and really excited to have all of you on the show today. Peter Lee and John Williams from Summit Trail Advisors, along with myself and my team at 76 Capital, presenting this Investing in Sports series, today focused on esports. And we just heard from the president of Harrisburg University talking about this is truly a career path, and you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars if you are an amazing esports player. So let's go to the coach. Joe, let's talk a little bit about, what does it mean to be a collegiate esports player? A lot of us know what it means to be a collegiate, traditional athlete, the training, the nutrition side of things, the mental health side of it. What is it really? What is the difference between it being a physical athlete and an esports athlete at Harrisburg University?
Yeah, great question, Wayne. I mean, believe it or not, nowadays, we're trying to implement as much as we can from, say, a traditional athletic program into our program. So when we talk about things like nutrition, well-being, staying healthy, great time management, academic excellence, I mean, those all become part of, what we're trying to build. I think there's a common misconception that our students are just here to play and compete, and that all we care about is winning or whatever it may be. But really, it's a lot more than that. And President Dar said it very well. But I mean, we're really in the business of trying to build an entire pipeline. It's not just for these students to graduate and then only rely on being able to play the game or compete, but it's about them finding success, academic excellence, competing, and being able to pursue whatever professional careers they want to ultimately. And yeah, I mean, all the parts you mentioned, like nutrition and staying healthy and staying fit, we have all of those in place here. I mean, our students have their own personal trainer that they all see twice a week. We've had a meal plan that we distribute weekly, a healthy meal plan for all of our esports students. And that's just some of the things in which we've taken the initiative to really build an entire program, not just a team that can compete. I mean, I think by now it's fairly easy for a lot of organizations and colleges and universities to be able to do that, but ultimately our goal as universities is to be able to build an entire curriculum and ultimately program out of all of this.
So I know that our producer of the show, my chief of staff, James, put up a picture of the Harrisburg team room, which is beautiful. Harrisburg Storm team room. There it is. And Joe, maybe share with everybody what's going on right now with your team and where you are in your competition. It sounds like you potentially could be a national champion again. What's going on there?
Sure. So, I mean, while we don't have all of our students here on campus, as we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, and while we may not be using the facility as much as we normally would, all of our operations have continued very successfully and effectively online. And it's been like this for the last couple months since everyone went into quarantine and lockdown. But we have found so much success just in the last couple months. We've won a couple different championships, and now we're finding ourselves actually heading into the grand finals of what I would say is our biggest league or primary league that my team competes in, which is the TESPA National Championship. And we're finding ourselves actually heading into the grand finals this weekend because we did so well throughout the season and just recently into playoffs. And what's really exciting about all of it is, even last year, just to put it into perspective for everyone else, there were, just over 300 colleges and universities across North America competing in this one league for this one esport. And this year, we're already reaching, numbers close to 600 colleges and universities. So it's almost doubled in just 1 year. And so for me to see that really puts it into perspective for me too, how much, the space is growing and how much of a need for there is ultimately, and how much more we can continue to do. But yeah, I mean, our team will be competing this weekend in the grand finals for the TESPA National Championship against Maryville University, a school I would consider to be, our biggest rival. And so this is a very exciting time, despite everything else that's going on in the world, not just for Harrisburg University, but for esports as a whole.
Hey, Joe. Sorry, Wayne. I have
please.
Quick follow-on question for Joe and Eric.
Sure.
So is there the same kind of line in the sand that distinguishes amateur athletes versus professional athletes in the esport world? And, are your players that play in your team, Joe, are they able to be compensated, for what they're doing, either, in the form of, prize money for winning competitions or marketing dollars or all the other ways that, as you alluded to, players can monetize their brand? Or is it more like traditional sports where there's a distinct kind of jumping off point, through which a player goes pro, and then that opens up all those new opportunities?
Right. So I would say that as of today, there's a lot less restrictions and regulations around that kind of thing in esports compared to traditional athletics. There really isn't anything like the NCAA, for example, in esports. There are a couple people who have stepped up and tried to be the governing body that the NCAA is for traditional athletics, but those are still fairly new. Those groups are still ironing everything out and figuring out what regulations should look like, what restrictions should look like. But to answer your question in short, I mean, for example, like the idea of students being able to hold on to their prize money after winning a certain competition, there's no restrictions on any of that. As for other monetary compensation, there isn't much of it as of today, but I think that's just because the space is relatively new. So until we have students who are able to build these massive brands and really put themselves out there, whether it be for sponsors to come in or for various other ventures, then we probably won't see much of that. But as of today, to answer your question in short, there are almost no restrictions to any of that in esports.
I mean, except for, obviously the university, we have as an educational institution and regulations that we follow and constituent groups that care about what universities do, we have a concern too about what games we're in and what our players do. And so, you can think about them almost as contracts that we have with our players. And, but those are the only pieces that restrict what a player can earn and what they can do, can't do, right? So to Joe's point, our players have won money in tournaments, and we're an institution that lets the players keep that money. We care more about what players do and say when they're, on social media, because of our sensitivity around our brand and our regulations. But that's a different matter.
Peter, do you have any follow-ups, or John? Or
Yeah, actually, you guys were talking earlier about the steep valuations that would exist if, say, one would purchase a team or create a team professionally. And, in our world, in the investment advisory world, clearly valuations are important. And we've seen, obviously in the tech space and on the social media space, when they first started, take example of Facebook, when they first IPO'd, so much of the valuation was driven by number of users. And then over time, of course, revenues mattered. As we know in the capital markets, sometimes they don't always matter. But over time, they started to matter. But early on, an emerging industry like social media, I use Facebook as an example, user growth was a driving factor, of course, of public valuation. So when you think about an emerging industry like, esports, and you think about valuations and the investment opportunities that exist there for either, high net worth individuals that may be interested in getting into this industry by way of, owning a team, are valuations starting to be driven early on like it was in the social media space with users or viewers of the gaming or the esports events? And when we see that intersection happen, which, none of us have a crystal ball as it relates to the revenue side, how are we seeing valuations driven by that? Is it similar to the early years of social media?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this one. I think that it's exactly the same, for me. So, you say that social media valuations and .com valuations were driven by user numbers. I'd say they were driven by market supply and demand. That's what people were willing to pay for them. Investors were fighting over what they saw as the thing they wanted to be a piece of because they saw huge returns in the future. All of the reverse engineered modeling to say this is what we paid in this valuation. I think that most educated investors who'd made those bets would say it was backed in. We wanted the deal and this is what we had to pay to get it. And I think that happens in esports now because it was so exciting and the franchise slots were limited and the opportunities were limited, that the supply and demand economics drove demand really, really high without supply changing much. And that's what drove really high valuations. But I think the fundamental difference here is what I call the ego play. And so, nobody wants to own Twitter just to say they own Twitter, back in 2008 or 9. Nobody wants to own a startup just to say they own a startup. You want money from it. But when you own a team, even if you never get a dollar back, you're going to be constantly in the press. You're going to have constant positive, news about you. There's going to be content being generated and flying around you. You're going to be a part of the culture. And so I think that's a much more appealing, component of this, just like traditional sports ownership, right? It's the same thing, the same idea of where the money and valuations come from in traditional sports franchises. A lot of the investors who happen to make a ton of money along the way set out with much less grand ambitions in their sports franchises. They just wanted to own a team and they wanted to be a part of that universe. And so I think that's the big difference when it comes to esports teams and what'll keep carrying the valuations high. Do I think there will be a correction in the industry in terms of valuations? I think that's coming, economically. I think, to an extent, we've flooded a market with a unforeseen amount of liquidity, so valuations are going to change, and inflationary metrics are not going to look the way that they used to look when you change the amount of capital in a system like this. Do I think that there's going to be corrections in terms of the supply and demand of the market? Yes. I think that the higher valuations with teams are going to get carried by that ego factor, whereas the infrastructural businesses and the content plays, the media plays, they're going to start to see valuations that are more metric driven sooner than teams ever will.
So that's John, somewhat bemoaning the fact that he's going to get measured by real things like revenue and something that somebody can hold him accountable for, right? As opposed to teams that that world is nowhere close to being held accountable to revenue. John's absolutely right.
He's absolutely right.
One of the pieces I would say though about supply demand is that as new games come out, Valorant as a new game entry, or even Rocket League, those present new opportunities to form new teams in new games, and the supply just continues to grow, right? So League of Legends and Overwatch, League of Legends particularly, has been around for more than a decade. Overwatch is, coming up on 5 years, and those games are fairly structured in terms of the franchise opportunities. But these new games, they present completely, greenfield opportunities for building orgs and new teams, and that's a really interesting and exciting part of the industry as well. It's not like the NFL where there are X number of teams and that's what there is, and short of an act of God, that's as many teams as there's going to be. That's not the case here, right? You got publishers every year coming out with new games.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating how fast this industry is going. It's fascinating to hear all the different parts of the industry, from building the infrastructure side, from an educational perspective, from the team perspective, the collegiate side, the professional side. We've heard so many different parts of that across our show today, Investing in Sports, focused on esports, brought to you by Summit Trail Advisors and 76 Capital. It's been a great show. We're supposed to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask at least one last question, unless Peter and John had anything else to say. But my last question, really, for our panelists today, are, what are your favorite games? What do you like to play when you're not, quote unquote, working in esports? I'll start with you, Eric.
I'm more of a grand strategy kind of player. So, anyone that's been to my office, I have a guy named Sid Meier created a game that's been around for more than a decade called Civilization. So I'm a hardcore Civ player. I also play a game called Crusader Kings, which has been out for 8 or 9 years. And these are all grand strategy games.
John? I can't hear John. How about Joe?
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I said I played a lot of Civ 5, so I dig that. I've played 20 years of CS:GO and StarCraft, but recently, I've been pretty hooked on VR games. I put 1,000 hours into PUBG, and now I'm pretty hooked on Warzone.
Awesome. And Joe, what's your game of choice?
Well, for me, it would obviously, have to be Overwatch, because that's what I started with. However, just recently with the introduction of Valorant coming into, the gaming world, I've been able to put a little bit of time into that game, and I've been enjoying it quite a lot. So, but yeah, believe it or not, I'm not even, playing nearly as much as I used to. Obviously, when I was a professional player, that's really all I did. Nowadays, it's much different. I don't really have my mindset on that as much. So, but every now and then, those are the games that, I still enjoy playing.
Good to hear that, Joe. Glad you're focused where you should be.
I'm not just saying that because my boss is in here. Actually.
So Wayne, I'll quick answer. So I'm not a gamer currently, but if I am going to pick it up, I've noticed on this call that I got to get one of the headsets like these guys, like John and Joe, to be legit. Those are bringing me back to my days. I feel like I'm on the college football field talking to my offense coordinator with the headset on. So got to pick up one of those here.
John, you have a game of choice?
Not yet, but I feel like after getting to know these guys, I'm going to. So the one thing that my daughter does play once in a great while, and I want to botch the name now, but Minecraft. Nice. Is one that she plays. Oh, yeah. She's 9, and I have no idea what she's doing, but she knows what she's doing. It's fun to watch, and it's certainly kind of one of those thinking games, it seems to me. So I endorse it.
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the games we didn't even mention, so much we could talk about and go on for hours is Fortnite, right? And how many, and is there? I guess this will be my last question. Is there a competition for Fortnite on the collegiate level, or is that just all individual? How's that playing out?
There's not. It's not a game that lends itself to competition, and particularly team competition. So colleges, it gets played in clubs at Harrisburg University and lots of other clubs, but in terms of finding other colleges to compete against, not something you're going to find. It's, made headlines, obviously, for, young kid outside of Philadelphia making millions, and, very lucrative tournaments for individuals to win and play, but not so much in the collegiate or professional.
Yeah, Eric, that's a great point. I mean, I think one of the things, just to wrap up on, is when you think about the world of Overwatch is a 6-on-6 game. So, Joe, how many players are on your Overwatch team?
Yeah, so in total today we have about 10 players on the team. So that consists of a starting 6 as well as some substitutes. Some teams in the professional league will go up to 12 players. There's actually a regulation in place that caps each team at a maximum of 12 players. But I mean, you can technically still field a team with just 6 players. It is 6-on-6, like you said.
Right, and then we talked about League of Legends, which is a 5-on-5 game. So it's really, really interesting to really dig in. And I'm happy we've had this opportunity. And as I said, I think that Peter, John, and I could spend hours with the three of you, but I know you have other things to work on. We appreciate your time. Appreciate President of Harrisburg University, Eric Darr, CEO of Nerd Street Gamers, John Fazio, Joe Germano, the head coach of the Harrisburg Storm's Overwatch team, and for Peter Lee, John Williams, and this whole Summit Trail family, thank you. I'm Wayne Kimmel from 76 Capital. Thank you so much for joining us, and and stay tuned for another edition of our Investing in Sports coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll focus on sports betting. That'll be something that we'll be doing, and hopefully we do many more of these things, because it's great to partner with Summit Trail advisors on these types of opportunities. And again, Joe, Eric, and John, thank you so much for joining us, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, everyone.